mail merge tutorial. Wahoo! I'm very excited about this one because I get a ton of questions on it, and a lot of people just don't even know that we have this capability, and so it just saves so much time. It honestly changed my life back when I started using it for email marketing in my previous job, and I love how it works for calligraphy and stationery design as well. So you'll notice I'm in InDesign. If you're not familiar with InDesign, never fear. There are a ton of tutorials online about how to use it. I'm going to show you how I set everything up for calligraphy, which is what I have here, and then also how I set everything up for printing addresses on envelopes. So that's what we've got set up here. You'll notice I just have these files. These are my actual files that I use. This one is just called merge file. This one's called merge file outer envelope CP flat, because those are all things that I need to know when I'm opening this to make sure it's set up the exact size and shape that I want. So we're going to start with your spreadsheet. So I've got this spreadsheet here. I've jumbled up everything for privacy's sake. This is a pretty good example of my address template. If you want to download my template, it is at designbylani.com/address template. Very easy, you can download it there. So what you can see is we have our column headings that are very easy to understand. This will help you down the road as opposed to just doing column 1, column 2, column 3. You want to know what's in each column by the name of it. So like city, state, if this were separated, we would want to put city in one column, state in one column. But this one tells us this is city, comma, state, and that's how everything is here. And you want to do any formatting that you want here in the spreadsheet. And if you have any addresses that it's typically the Northeast that have a 0 in front of them on the zip code, then for instance, if you have a zip code of 05473 and you press enter, you see that 0 goes away. So that's a question I get a lot. And if you just put an apostrophe in front of that 0, like so, then the apostrophe goes away. It actually doesn't matter that it's left justified here, but if you want, you can just right justify so it all looks the same. So that 0, that apostrophe goes away, so you actually don't have to worry about it downloading in your spreadsheet. But if you don't put the apostrophe, then that 0 is going to go away and you're going to have a 4-digit zip code, and that doesn't work. So make sure you put those apostrophes. That'll save you having to manually add those zeros later. So do any editing that you want to do here. For instance, if your client didn't spell out street, you can do a find and replace here and replace all of those. You can sort things however you want. But any editing you want to do, make sure you do it on the spreadsheet. And then once we've got it where we want to go, we're going to download it. So this is Google Sheets that we're using. You can use Excel, you can use Pages, you can use a ton of stuff. I just figured Google Sheets is something that all of you can have because it's free to use. So I wanted to show you on here. So you want to download this as a comma separated value or CSV. So any program that can download as a CSV is going to work for this. So you just download that. I have already done that. Okay, so now we're back in InDesign. And what we're going to want to do is go to our data merge panel, which can be found in Windows, Utilities, Data Merge. There we go. So I always have it up here because I use it a lot. And you can see that the things that are listed here, these fields are all listed over here, and there's a 1 for how many times it's used. However, we have things on here like inner envelope that we didn't have in our spreadsheet because we're not doing inners on this one. So what we're going to do is click this drop down and select data source. This is just telling us that some of our inserted fields may be invalid, like inner envelope. That's okay, because we're going to change that. And then I'm going to go to my tutorial that I've already gotten. So you can see those those fields change to the column headings that we have, which is great. That's exactly what we wanted to do. So I'm going to show you how to do this from scratch. So you can make a text box as big or as small as you want it. This is just for printing out for calligraphy's sake. So I like to keep it small and get as many on a page as I possibly can. If you want to print it out more true to size, so you can kind of see where it's gonna look like on the envelope, that's totally fine, but this is just how I like to do it. So then you're just gonna click these fields wherever you want them to be. So for instance, if we had city and state in separate columns, we might do city, comma, space, state. And that would make sure that there's a comma and a space between those two data fields. However, we have this in the same column, so we're just gonna keep that. If you wanted to put zip code on the same line, you can just put a space here and zip code. However, we actually want to have it on a separate line, so I'm gonna make sure you backspace so there's not an extra space there, and then put that on a separate line. And what this does is whatever is in a certain row under names is going to correlate with whatever's in a certain row under address. So these are our column headings. So each row you'll see is gonna put whatever we have here. So we have Sean David Gibbons, 10 Light Street, apartment 102. And if we go back over here, we have Sean David Gibbons, 10 Light Street, apartment 102. We have a different zip code because we did change that. But all of that correlates, and you can also go through all of them and preview how they're gonna look just to make sure they all look how you want them to. And if you want to format these in any way, you absolutely can. For instance, if you want to put the names in some type of calligraphy font, that's always fine, just to see how that's gonna look if you're doing a mix and match. Or if you want to spread anything out, a lot of times I'll spread out the zip code a lot because then it shows kind of how that's gonna look as a whole. It kind of doesn't matter, do whatever you want. If I'm going to do block letters for any portion, then I might select all of this and change it to all caps just so I can see how that's gonna look. But for the most part, I keep it very simple. So whenever you've got it how you want it, you just wanna click this drop down and do create merge document. So here we have all of our options. So we have records. That'll just tell you which rows you want to use. So if you only wanted to do a certain number of rows, you could select the range or just do a single record. This multiple or single record is what we're gonna use later. And that's if you only want one address per page. However, we wanna put a bunch on the same page because we wanna save paper. Multiple record layout, this is just the margins. Just play with those a little bit to see. That's gonna be the margins between each text box. I keep them pretty small because I want a bunch on the page, but you can do whatever you like. And then the arrange by rows first and columns first. So columns first just means that row 1 will be here, row 2 will be under it, and down all the way to the end of the page. And that's how I always follow the list. But if you wanted rows first, that would just mean that row 1 was here, row 2 was here, row 3 was over here, and it would just go back and forth across the page. So I like columns first, and then you can also change the spacing between the columns and the rows. Now options, this is going to be very important. This little guy right here that says remove blank lines for empty fields. So I'm gonna go back here and kind of show you what that means. So you see address line 2. You go back to your spreadsheet, we don't have an apartment number on every single one. We just have them on some of them. So what that means is that some of them are going to have 5 lines and some of them are going to have 4 lines like this. Now, if you don't check that box, then what you're gonna have is, I'll go ahead and do it. So if you don't check that box, then what you're gonna have is these weird blank lines. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I just don't like it. And if you're printing your addresses, like we'll talk about later, then you definitely don't wanna have those weird blank lines there. So I'm just gonna go back here and select that option. And then you can do a page limit if you want. This has stuff about images because you can include images in your merge document. We don't really need to do any of that. So overset text is just when things don't necessarily fit into the text box and have to go away. So you may have to make, if you had a really long name, you may have to make this smaller. However, that doesn't really happen on here because like this is a very, very long name, and yet I made the text box big enough because the font is really small. So you'll see that this created a list, got 8 rows of 2 columns each, and then you can scroll down and see all the things. And this is set up on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so I can just print directly from here. And this is how I like all of my calligraphy addresses to be lined up. And people ask me often why I don't just want a Word document with the addresses already written out like this, but I find that there are a lot of errors, specifically formatting errors, like I mentioned before, that someone may have written, you know, APT instead of apartment or ST instead of street. And for the most part, I do rely on my clients to do that correctly. But a lot of times it's easier for me to just go ahead and do a find and replace, for instance, just to show you a little bit about how to do that. So say we wanted to change everything that said street back to ST period. Then you could just do replace all. So then we could switch these if we're trying to fix them. And that took me 4 seconds, which is way faster than emailing the client back and asking them to do it. Whereas if it was all in a Word document already listed like this, I would have to go through each individual one and change that out. So I just like it in an Excel sheet because you have sorting capabilities, formatting capabilities. There's just a lot of tools that you can use in Excel to change multiple at one time if there are similar formatting issues in different places. So now we have that. I would just print it out and do the calligraphy from there. And what I love about this is you can save that file for that client, and then this file stays exactly where it is. So because I use the same address template a lot, these field names stay pretty much the same. So I can just save this how it is, and then just upload a new data source every time you have a new spreadsheet, which is awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of this one, and then I'll show you this guy. And this one you can print directly from InDesign, or you can export it as a PDF. Here we go, we got export right here, and you can change all your PDF presets here for how you want it to export. Some people like to print from PDFs. I don't mind printing from InDesign. You'll notice that my setup is really, really close to the bottom of the page. I do find that my printer typically prints a little bit lower than it shows on the page, and while I could fiddle around with print settings a ton, it's just easier to lower this box a little bit on each page. The cool thing about this is you can have these variable elements like we've talked about, these fields in the brackets here, but you can also have static elements. So this is a return address that will print on the flap, which is gonna stay the same for every single one. So you just format that correctly, change the color, do whatever you wanna do to it, and then it'll stay the same on each page. And then you basically do the same thing here that we did on the previous one, just it's more important to have your formatting correctly. So you'll see here we have all caps, I have some spacing, I have some line spacing here, exactly how I want it, and then I have the zip code spaced out, kerning to 2000 because I want that to be very big. That blank lines, removing blank lines field that we had over here in the options panel is very important here. So I have country. So what I do if there are different countries on the list is I just keep everything in separate columns. So if it's a new line, say this was in Paris, and then the code, you know, I don't know these off the top of my head. I'm just gonna make them up, but the city and zip code need to be on the same line, and then you could just do France over here. So as long as they're in separate columns for each line on the envelope, then you're good to go. It doesn't matter that this isn't actually a zip code. So I like to do those, and if you typically the country ends up at the bottom because they have an extra line in here. So then the country will disappear if there's not one. So if it isn't America, then when you create the merge document, because you've done this blank lines for empty fields, that line will just go away and you'll end on the zip code. And then we have this cute little kindly deliver to. And another example of this that I've grabbed over here, you can add graphics to this. I'm not gonna worry about placing that exactly as I want. But if you, for instance, wanted this little graphic over here on every invitation right here, then you could go ahead and place that and it would be the same on every one. So I'll just go ahead and show you this. Takes a minute. But you can see that those static graphics, the kindly deliver to, the return address, and the bouquet here have remained the same on each one, even though you have different names. So we have Elaine Baringhouse, Cara Benavides, Ashley Albers. So you can see how that worked out. And this one has a unit number. Whoops. This one has a unit number, whereas this one doesn't, but it doesn't look weird because we checked that blank lines box. So I love this because you can do various formatting. You can change this to be the names if you want, and it'll have that formatting, and then you could erase that one. So then when you create the merge document, this has a lot of overset text, which I'll show you in just a second. Let's see, page 3. Okay. So you see this one has the name in that calligraphy font, and then all the rest of it in the normal script or print font. So then on page 3 we have some overset text. So this box is only so big, so you can see it says Baring, and then it's got a dash here. And if you remember, that was Baringhouse back when we did it before. So that's what the overset text report is. It just tells you if there's anything, and you can make the box bigger. Sometimes you just need to make the font smaller, because if you start out with a box as big as the envelope, some names are going to be longer than others, and there's only so much you can do. Another thing you can do there, if you saw there was a ton of overset text, like there was, what you might want to do is start with a larger box. Create our merge document. And chances are there's still going to be something. Okay, so we still have 22. So maybe that's telling us that our font is just too big. So then we can make this a little bit smaller. Try it again. And this is where it sometimes just takes a little trial and error because everyone's names are different. So we still have about 14 of those. I kind of like the size where it is, so I might use that report to go through each one and just make the size a little bit smaller. So see this one, it's a little too big, so you can go through and make that smaller until you get to a point where it all fits as well as it can. Or you can go through and decide if you want to put them on 2 lines and make it bigger. There's a lot of different things you can do. So that overset text report will just point out which names are the longest, and then you can figure out what you want to do with them. So sometimes there is just a little bit of special formatting. Some fonts are a little bit weird. So you still want to look through your merge document and make sure that everything looks good before you print it. I really like to send a PDF export of that to my clients, have them see how it's actually all going to look on the envelopes before we print, and then give them a chance to make one round of edits, which they have to make to the Excel sheet. So some of those foreign addresses, you might need to do a little bit of extra formatting. There's a few things that you always need to check over, but this saves you so much more time. Like this takes 8 minutes to do, depending on your formatting in the beginning. And then, you know, maybe 10 minutes of individual editing, as opposed to the amount of time it would take you to actually type out all of these in the specific format for each envelope. So I absolutely love this. You can use a very similar method for creating table numbers, for creating place cards, anything that's got static elements and variable elements, or even just variable elements in general that you're printing out. It's so helpful to use data merge, because think about it, this could be name, this could be table number, and this could be food choice. So think about how much easier that would make it for you to do all your place cards, your escort cards, and then if you wanted to have like a little leaf element over here or something like that, just make sure you set up your board the size that you want it to print. And the great thing with InDesign is that you can print multiple records per page pretty easily, as opposed to something like Illustrator where it's really hard to do that. And my last tip is just to do as much formatting as possible on the merge file before you actually create the merge document. Because if you go through, for instance, if you create the merge document and realize you didn't change the color and you've already gone through and done a lot of customized changes, then it's going to be annoying. You're going to have to go back here, change the color of everything, and then redo some of those custom changes. So just do as much work as you possibly can on this merge document. Test it out, exit out of it, redo it as much as you need to before you do any of that customized editing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this mail merge tutorial. Let me know what you thought of it below. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. We have a lot of great tutorials coming out soon, and comment to let us know what you thought so that we can keep creating the right content for you. Happy mail merging!